Hi, everybody hear me okay? Awesome. I'm Meri. These days I'm a CTO. I lead the team at Meri, which is a 150-person strong technology and product team. But I started out as a hardware hacker when I was a kid. The most interesting thing I did as a kid growing up, I built part of South Africa's first satellite when I was a teenager. Who of you got kids? Fair few. Don't let them do anything cool when they're young. Like literally, I soldered something that went into space when I was 16, and it's all been fucking downhill since then. Just a broken person. I've had probably a pretty varied career. Worked for some big companies like Procter & Gamble, helped build the government digital service. I made the GovUK cake for anybody who followed GDS's adventures. And these days, I also help run the Lead Dev Conference, which runs in London every year, but also in Austin and in New York next year. But today is a story about how I felt the first time people asked me to do people stuff. So I'm from an artificial intelligence background, so I really enjoyed the opening keynote this morning about expert systems and machine learning and what we even really mean by all of that stuff. And I moved into looking after people stuff because computers were too easy, which again I would not necessarily advise as a career path or strategy. But my reaction when I first got asked to manage people was to be absolutely terrified. And I think that's because I'd had some pretty bad bosses at that point, and we all hate bad bosses. We describe them as clueless, as empty suits, pointless. We're all familiar with the seagull style of management. Fly in, shout at everybody, shit on everything, fly away again. Right? I've had one audience that didn't laugh at that joke, and I was like, are your bosses all here? Or is this a country where that doesn't happen? Because if it doesn't happen here, I want to know. And so my reaction was basically to refuse to be a bad boss. This is the best cat gif on the internet. I've done extensive research and found it for you. And so I decided that if my option was to be a bad boss, fuck that thing in particular. I was gonna find a way to not be terrible at this if I had to do it. And so I went looking for guidance. I love this articulation from Katerina about how there are 3 types of managers. The shit umbrella protects their team. The shit funnel chooses the person they hate the most and directs everything onto them. Or the shit fan who just indiscriminately spreads bullshit around. And so I decided, well, okay, at least I have some ambition now. I can try to be a bullshit umbrella, right? But my wife would tell you, I don't have a flight response. I only have a fight response. And I'm South African, right? We're very direct. We, if you don't have enough South African friends to understand the culture, we had 300 years of Dutch rule and then 100 years of British rule. So we're very direct and then mildly apologetic about it. Like, that shirt looks terrible on you. I'm so sorry. I felt like I had to say something. That's pretty much like South African culture encapsulated. And so I went looking for guidance, and I'm a nerd, so I went looking for books and research and science. And the most heartening thing I found really early on is traditional management beliefs are a pile of shit. None of it works. Like, traditional wisdom is all crap, and it's all been disproven. And there is like a proper field of management science where they do proper research and look into this stuff. And people who are still trying to lead as if they are a Roman general are failing at life and definitely failing to engage and inspire their engineering teams. And so what does work? Has anybody read this book, First Break All the Rules? Yeah, wow, I really am a nerd. Okay, so this is my favorite management book, and I realize that none of you are going to have a beer with me later now because I have a favorite management book, but I'm still going to run with it. And the reason I love this book is that it's hugely data-based. So Gallup did a study that included hundreds of thousands of interviews across lots of different companies and sectors and all of these different places to figure out what made high-performing teams, what made this division more profitable than the others. They didn't go looking for what made people happy. They went looking for what made people better. Why is this restaurant better than all the others in the chain? Why does this factory kill fewer of its people? What are all, like, literally, that's one of the measures. And what do the best teams do differently? What makes them outperform others? And it turned out that a lot of it was what best managers did differently. And so they found these 12 predictors of high performance. The research was done in the late 90s, and some of the phrasing of the questions indicates that. But I know that none of us can keep 12 things in our heads. My immediate reaction to that is like, thanks, now I'm drowning in 12 things I'll never remember. So let's zoom out for a second and understand motivation. Who's read Drive? Cool, a couple people. There's like a 15-minute long video that I'll tweet out a link to. That's, if you don't have time to read a book, it's very worth watching. So Dan Pink did a kind of roundup of the latest psychology and management research not that many years ago now, and articulated that there were 3 things that really mattered for people to be motivated at work. That they had purpose, they had autonomy, and they had mastery. And so motivation's about understanding and believing in the why, getting a say in what, so feeling like you get listened to at work, you get some say in the direction that you're taking, and then being proud of what you're doing and how you're doing it, so that element of mastery. And take away any negative factors that detract. And so if we take those 12 questions that I showed a second ago, they fit quite neatly into these categories. Does the mission or purpose of my company make me feel like my work is important? One thing I found, I've probably managed thousands of people over the last 15 years in total in my teams, and the level at which people need to find a purpose is really fascinating, and it's a difference you see individual to individual. Some people are not happy unless they feel like they are saving the world, and their overall overarching purpose has to really be about that. And some people are just happy if the thing they're doing seems to make sense in the broader element of what the team is trying to achieve. Autonomy, do I know what's expected of me? Do my opinions seem to count? And then it's fascinating to me how much of this is about mastery. Do I have the materials and equipment needed to do my work right? Do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? Someone at work cares about my development. Are my coworkers committed to doing quality work? Do I feel like I'm the only one who cares, or does everybody care? In the last 6 months, have I talked with somebody about my development, and have I had opportunities to learn and grow? And that actually rings very true for me with what I found with teams of makers. We care a lot about whether we're doing good work, not just whether we're being paid. For any of you who were in the room here earlier, for the last speaker who named an average developer salary, which may seem, in America they get paid a lot better. Don't all worry that you're like wildly underpaid versus the amount that was that was quoted. But there's some other things too. In the last 7 days, have I received recognition or praise for good work? Does my supervisor, how 90s is that? Does my supervisor or someone at work seem to care about me as a person? Do I have a best friend at work? I love this last question because it is a fascinating insight into a major cultural difference. Apparently, in the US, you could ask somebody the question, do you have a best friend at work? And their answer isn't the British or Nordic response, which is, fuck you, you don't get to choose where I choose my best friend from. So, the translation for those of us living in North Europe is there someone at work who I would willingly spend any time with outside of work, even if work weren't paying for the alcohol? That is how to translate that question. My American friends, I adore your optimism, but we don't share it. And so this I would sum up as, am I being respected and rewarded here? Can I be myself and succeed here? I call it inclusion. Camille Fournier calls it community. There's lots of different ways of packaging this up, but it's basically the other stuff that matters outside of purpose, autonomy, and mastery. The question I like best of these 12 is, do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? And ever since I started asking myself that, I made much better career choices. I left jobs that probably paid a little too well, but were slowly killing me. And I've probably found the thing that I enjoyed the most a lot better by asking this question on a fairly regular basis of myself and helping my teams people in my teams ask it of themselves. And I think it's because we have to recognize that leveling people out to be equally kind of consistent and mediocre isn't a successful strategy. We need to focus on getting the most out of how people are different, not trying to make everybody the same. We're not interchangeable resource units. And if somebody calls you a resource, from that moment on, refer to them as overhead, and they very quickly stop calling people resources. Come on. I know I'm between you and beer, but work with me here, people. That's a good line. So let's think of ourselves as like we're colors or we're flavors. We're better in complement. We're better in concert with each other. The Avengers aren't cool. Like, can you imagine if they were all Tony Stark? Although, like, 9 Hulks would be amazing. I would watch the shit out of that movie. But what if we think of this as people and roles as a matter of casting, about finding the place where somebody can be best at who they are and what they do? How do we get that great team with complementary abilities? Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows I became like a Ghostbusters viewing booking engine about a year ago for about 15 weeks. Somewhere there's a poor data scientist in the center of the Odeon HQ going, why the fuck did Ghostbusters run for 18 weeks at Leicester Square? And one day I hope to explain how it's all my fault. And so how do we do this? We create space for people to be awesome. And I think this may be a little bit hippie, but one of my fundamental bits of philosophy or things I believe is every person's capable of being awesome. Everybody's capable of virtuosity. Nobody gets up in the morning aiming to be mediocre. Nobody gets up in the morning and goes, today I want to be mildly below average at my job. And if I can fuck up everybody else along the way, then my day will be perfect, right? Like, sociopaths exist. Find them, and then either exit them or run away from them. The choice is yours. But on the whole, like, people don't want to be shit at what they do. People want to be good at what they do. People want to find a way to be awesome at what they do and to feel like they're part of a team that cares and that they're building something that matters. And so space to be awesome is about these 4 things. Purpose, do I believe in why? Autonomy, do I get a say in what? Mastery, am I proud of how? And then inclusion, do I feel like I belong here? Can someone like me do well here? And then take away any negative factors that detract. Even if all of these conditions are amazing, if your commute is 3 hours each way every day, then it's going to be pretty difficult to overcome that. And I think our mission as a manager or a leader or an individual contributor is to create that space for people to be the best they can be, whether that's on an open source project, on your team at work, whether you're a tech lead looking after people at this point, an edge manager, or you're just a coworker helping the people around you to develop their skills. And so ask yourself, do people know why we're doing what we're doing? Do they get a say in doing the right thing? And then do we get opportunities to do the thing right? To get better at how we're doing things, to feel like we're developing our skills? And then do we do a good job making sure different people feel included and like they belong? And so those 12 things that are impossible to remember refactor quite nicely into these 4 areas, which are a little bit easier, at least before the beer and the whiskey comes out later, right? But it's useful theory and hopefully a decent framework, but what does it mean day to day and week to week? The first is you need to, the more senior you become, the more your role is to help be a translator for other people. It's to protect purpose, help people understand how what they're doing in the day-to-day connects with what is being done in a broader sense. And if what's being done in a broader sense makes no sense, calling that out and talking about it. Connect what people are doing and what they can do in the future to that overall important purpose. Enable autonomy and mastery. You can spend an inordinate amount of money going on a course called Situational Leadership, which will spend 3 days explaining this diagram to you, which is basically the clue skills matrix, right? People need different things depending on where they are for a particular skill or task or piece of work, depending on where they are in this. So if people know what to do, and they're equipped with all the skills, knowledge, and things they need to get it done, then what they need from you is to be a bulldozer and a cheerleader. You get shit out of their way and you tell them they're awesome. Very few people are always in that top right bracket, but also very few people are in the bottom left where they don't know what to do and don't know how to do it. But what I see a lot in new managers and new tech leads in many teams is people who just oscillate between those 2 things. They're either micromanaging or they're completely hands-off. And they don't know that people are much more likely to be in the other 2 quadrants most of the time. So they might know what to do, but they need some skills or some help or some time or some people to help them out. Or they've got loads of skill, they know they're fully capable, but they need some help figuring out what the right direction to take is. And that's kind of mentoring or coaching, depending on what people need. And so when somebody's struggling, take a moment to stop and go, where are they in this? Do they know what to do? Have they got everything they need to get it done? And where's the deficiency and how are you best to help them? It's almost never the right thing to jump in and tell somebody exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. Like micromanagement by default is a terrible anti-pattern, and try to help people realize when they're doing it and to stop them and help them do something different. Has anybody read either of these books? I feel like a walking library, but trust me, it's useful. Cool, few of you. Outliers is he skips around a little bit, but it's a useful kind of pop-sci version. Talent is Overrated is a lot more dry, but it looks at the research a little bit in more detail. Talent is Overrated literally changed my life because it made me realize that that the soft skills fairy didn't exist. That you didn't wait in a line before you were born and get touched with a magic wand that made you good at people or not good at people. Everything can be learned. It's just about how we apply ourselves and how we do better at these things. Talent is Overrated describes two really interesting scenarios. One is this is where a lot of the 10,000 hour rule stuff comes from. Of if you apply yourself to the things that make you better at the overall skill, then you'll get better. The classic example is from the best violin school in the world. A set of researchers went to find out how they could identify musical talent really early. And I love science, where scientists genuinely believe something exists, and they're just trying to find out how to measure it, and then find out that it doesn't exist at all, because that's proper science, really having your hypotheses examined. And they went to this amazing violin school, asked the lecturers to divide the class into who's going to be a world-class soloist in a major orchestra, who's probably going to play in a pretty good orchestra, but they're not going to be a world-class soloist, and who's going to be a music teacher. And that's not dissing music teachers. They had a special program to make sure the people who maybe weren't going to be amazing professional musicians were still learning amazing techniques so that the next generation would get there. And they interviewed their parents, and they looked at their childhood histories, and they thought that maybe the fact that some of them, the parents hummed or played music whilst they were still in the womb, they thought maybe that was making a difference. They looked for everything. They looked for every variable they could. And they found that the only real predictor of this amazing performance was how many hours at the point that somebody arrived at this school they had spent on individual practice. I don't play the violin. I'm a working class South African kid. They didn't let us have expensive instruments. But I'm told that that's the least enjoyable part of playing violin, is sitting on your own, practicing really hard to learn the music, to learn the technique. The fun part's the orchestra. The fun part's playing with your friends. But the hard part that makes you better is sitting alone and practicing very deliberately to get your skill level up. The other example is one from sports. So there's a possibly apocryphal story of a couple sat watching ice hockey, and one remarks to the other that it's strange that they're all born at the same time. And the partner goes, no, this one's 28 and this one's the new 19-year-old. They're not the same age at all. No, they're all born in January or February. And it was true. And in Canada, turns out the school cutoff age is December. And so if you're born in January or February, you're older than everybody else in the year. And when you're 4 years old, which apparently is when you start training to beat people up on the ice, I'm from South, rugby and water polo. I have nothing against violent sports, for the record. Water polo is the most violent sport in the world. And if anybody wants a compare and contrast against rugby or anything else later, then I'm totally here for that. And apparently, when you're 4, but the coordination and height and weight difference between a 4-year-old and a 4-year and 11-month-year-old is very, very significant. And so what happens is, if you're the oldest in your year, you're more likely to not be Bambi-legged and falling over yourself all the time. And so you get to play a lot more because you're good when you're young. And because ice hockey is a sport where you need lots of things to be made available to you to get better at it, right? You need teammates, you need skates, you need ice, you need an opposing team to beat the shit out of. All of these things are required for you to get better and better. It snowballs over time excuse the pun, that you've been good when you were really young, and so you play a lot more practices, you play a lot more matches, and by the time you're 20, you've had way much more time on the ice than somebody who just happened to be born in October and so wasn't the biggest kid in the class when they started out. The counterexample to this is basketball. All you need to get great at basketball is a hoop and a ball, maybe an opponent. And you can find one opponent to increase your skill in basketball much more easily than you can find enough people to increase your skill at ice hockey. And so you see this difference in the kind of the things made available to people and the time spent from one to the other. And so what do these two stories tell us? We're good at what we do, what we practice, providing we can learn from it. And that leads to this fairly kind of formal definition of what deliberate practice is. You have to be motivated to attend to the task, you exert effort to improve your performance, it takes into account what you already know, you receive immediate informative feedback, you repeatedly perform the same or similar tasks. And possibly my memory is just terrible, but again, this is a little formal and a little long for me. I like to think of this as, it's just like video games. If it's too hard, you peace out. If it's too repetitive, you peace out. You need the right level of kind of challenge and it building on what you've already played earlier in the game for it to be challenging and demanding, but not so much so that you abandon the game. And you need it to be repetitive enough that you get good at things, but not so repetitive that you get bored. And this is really interesting from a kind of learning theory point of view. But who really has thought about their day-to-day job as a learning experience in this way? Has anybody here tried to set their day up as deliberate practice? Yeah? Can you give an example?
Yeah, sure. So whenever I want to solve a new problem, I'll go look at whatever new technology I can grab and then go and play with that, or maybe play with it at home, maybe the night before, the week before, if I know a problem's coming up.
Yeah.
Sit and play with that, do it in the lab, and then go and learn that new technology and solve my problem.
So deliberately try to identify the need and then practice using it before you need it for real. Yeah. There's some really interesting examples that we're starting to see in software engineering now, people doing this when they do testing katas or they do kind of deliberate practice of trying to solve the same problems over and over again, algorithmic challenges that are useful in a day-to-day way, not in a like coding whiteboard interview kind of way. And there are these different models of deliberate practice. The sports model, you get good at the things that will eventually make you good at the final activity. So you can lift weights to be a better rugby player. It's not because you lift weights on the pitch. It's because being strong is helpful, right? There's the chess model, so looking at what somebody much better than you did, and go. So you look at the board, you go, what would I do? And then you compare to a grandmaster's actual move and analyze why your move was the same or was different, and figure out how to learn from that. And the music model, which is about breaking things down into repeatable chunks that you can then put together. And so picking which of these is the most useful thing to use depends on your situation and your preferred way of learning as well. And so think about how to design your work in a way that makes it more effective as deliberate practice. Are you doing things, is there enough repetition that you're able to build on what you know and keep doing better? And is it challenging, you get enough feedback, are you able to learn? And then finally, that sense of community or inclusion is about finding or making a space in which you feel like you can be successful. And this is actually pretty much the best predictor of whether you can attract, recruit, and retain people into your team or your project or your open source effort, is whether somebody looks at it and goes, yeah, somebody like me could be successful here. Because people want to be great at what they do. They want to find somewhere where they're going to learn and they're going to shine. And so let me talk a bit more about this. But first, I'm going to admit, I am the one the Daily Mail warned you about. I have this T-shirt. When I worked for the government, HR formally asked me not to wear it in case the actual Daily Mail took a photo of a civil servant wearing this T-shirt, which is one of my proudest moments in my whole career. But I'll admit right now, I'm a bit of a diversity statistic, right? I'm a woman who works in tech, which is sadly an unusual thing. I'm gay, I'm foreign. I have a job, which I think, because I'm foreign, is worse than if I were unemployed and living off the state. But I got to be honest, I check the headlines very regularly just to be sure. I actually have a pretty severe disability, although I'm not like living off your NHS, I promise. I pay my own way. I'm godless. And my wife is British, so I'm literally over here stealing your women and your jobs. She doesn't love that joke, no. But anyway, yeah. But I grew up hugely aware of the kind of unasked and undeserved racial privilege I had. So I grew up white during apartheid. I grew up with these signs everywhere in my world when I was a kid. So net blancas means whites only. And those signs were on beaches, on toilets, on almost all public transportation. And it was horrible and it was horrific, but I wasn't personally targeted by it. I was just growing up with it around me. And I think that I had a lot of privilege just because of the fact that I was pasty white and ginger, right? Like I could go to school. It wasn't the fact I was a woman meant going to university might be a problem, but not my race. And so I had a whole bunch of things that I didn't think about as privilege. I didn't compare myself to the kids in my class who lived in homes without electricity and go, I'm so lucky that there's light when I need to do my maths homework. Nobody recognizes that heat and warmth are things that feel like a privilege until it's taken away. And so I think I can't deny that, and much as I'm in the minority in all these other fantastic ways that make the Daily Mail hate me, I had this immense privilege growing up that I didn't deserve and didn't earn. It was just a mistake. And I think one thing I found growing up during this was it was very blatant. It was legislative. It was very real. And then coming to other countries where it's probably still very real, it's just not quite as blatant. It's not necessarily in the laws. Was a very different experience. If you haven't read Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege Knapsack, I'd strongly encourage you to. It's a very interesting way to make you reflect on the things that you don't notice, which is pretty much all that privilege is, right? The things that are giving you an advantage that you don't even think about or don't even notice. And so not discriminating is important, like legally, if nothing else. We're at least in a country that cares about that. But I think tolerance is a terrible word. Who wants to be tolerated at work? Like, my little brother loves me but kind of hates me. He tolerates me. That's what tolerance means. It means, like, I hate you, but I'll put up with you. I don't think that we should aspire to be tolerated or to tolerate others. I think a fully inclusive environment would be better. And I think that because it helps everybody. It doesn't say, let's take this other group and level them up. It says, let's make it better for everyone. And so if diversity is a spectrum with the kind of active isms down the one end and active inclusion down the other, aiming for tolerance or indifference isn't necessarily great. Does everybody know what a microaggression is? So microaggression is, an example is it's telling young boys that they're very smart and young girls that they're very pretty. My favorite microaggression I get a lot is when people realize I'm foreign, they tell me how good my English is, which is great because it's my mother tongue. I've been speaking it literally since I was born. Oh, no, not literally since I was born. Like I wasn't some kind of prodigy. I didn't like pop out and just start immediately. But you know what I mean, right? Microaggressions are ways of deliberately reinforcing difference, saying you don't belong here, you're not like us. And that shit gets old. It gets hard to put up with because it happens all the time. And so how do we move the right way? This sounds terribly trite, and you're going to have to forgive me and trust that I'm getting some more practical things in a moment. We stop allowing under-indexed or underprivileged groups to be pushed away, whether actively and deliberately or passively and unintentionally. And we start building actively inclusive environments. And the kind of framework I'd give you to use when you think about this for yourself, when you think about it for your teams, when you try and have the uncomfortable conversation with your boss about how we're interviewing again and we haven't seen anybody who doesn't look like they're wearing matching underwear as well as matching ties. Like, ask these 3 questions, or remember that somebody, when they're joining your team, your open source project, whatever it is, they're asking these questions. They're saying, am I expected here? Am I respected here? And can I be myself and be successful here? They're asking these questions when they're deciding whether to take that promotion, when they're deciding whether to stay for another year or not. I think people who, a really good piece of career advice I got early on was to very actively decide every year whether I was staying or going. And I got this from somebody who actively decided 21 Christmases in a row that they were going to stay at Procter & Gamble, which is the company we were both working at the time. But the fact that they'd actively kind of re-upped every year made them much more deliberate and much more successful in their career. And so what do these questions kind of mean? So am I expected? Does it look like people like me exist here? Or like different kinds of, like, I gotta be honest, I don't find many exact role models, given that whole Daily Mail thing I talked about a minute ago, right? But there's some indications of whether people like me are expected. Places that don't talk anywhere about, like conferences that don't list whether the venue is accessible are clearly not expected somebody disabled to be there. And today I can walk, but what's wrong with me? I have days when I'm on crutches, I have days when I can't walk at all. And so that kind of stuff matters. It's indicative of whether somebody thinks that people like me should be there. Do the pictures reflect me? Do the policies and benefits include me? I get called a lot by startups in London. I'm an advisor to a couple of VCs and that kind of thing. And they're like, so we can't figure out why we only have like 24-year-old straight white dudes working here. I'm like, literally all that is on your employee benefits page is a foosball table and beer. Are you seriously telling me that you can't, like, with the intellectual and logical power that you have as programmers, you cannot put together what is wrong in this situation? Fuck's sake. Anyway, so think about what signals you're sending and whether it's useful. Am I respected? Are my superpowers valuable here? And think about people as having a set of skills or powers that, if they are cast right, they could be awesome at their job. Respect the people who are good at finding that weird fucking bug that nobody else would find. They're making quality in your team so much better than it would be otherwise. Referring to them as just a tester is bullshit. Reinforcing the kind of hierarchies we see between jobs in our industry is not going to help, right? People are trying to figure out whether the way in which they're different is valuable rather than just put up with, rather than just tolerated. And remember that it's going to be part of the experience they have when they're first interacting with you that tells them that. We had this from the other side recently. We had a candidate who got interviewed by 2 people in my team, and the 2 people are an engineering director and an engineering manager. And the candidate assumed that the guy would be more senior and that the woman was less so, and repeatedly during the interview went, I mean, excuse me for giving a technical answer you won't understand. And spoke to the guy who actually is much more junior and much less technical than she is. So much so that they were both like just trying not to laugh by the end of the interview, right? And so, don't be that candidate, but also think about whether you've ever created that experience for a candidate as well. Think about how you're coming across as a team or a community. And then people are asking themselves, could I be who I am and can I succeed here? Am I going to have to spend half my energy just pretending that I'm something I'm not? That's not setting someone up for success, right? And so think about the fact that you should be asking that question yourself, and that people that you're trying to get to come and be part of your project, your team, your meetup, your community, they're asking those questions too. And then final note, don't forget to sweat the small stuff. The thing I find funniest about this picture is I'm the one who had to take the company logo off it. It actually is like a massive banner across the middle of this warehouse that looks like the worst possible place to concentrate on a difficult problem, right? And so, if you have purpose, autonomy, mastery, and inclusion, people will put up with a lot, but eventually the fact that they're running on a 4-year-old machine that can't actually keep up with their version of their IDE, it's going to get to them eventually. So help people remember that these hygiene factors matter as well. And so Space to be Awesome is about these 4 things: purpose, autonomy, mastery, and inclusion. Do I believe in why? Do I get a say in what? Am I proud of how? Do I feel like I belong here? Can I be myself and succeed here? And remember that everybody gets up in the morning trying to be good at what they do. So if somebody sucks, figure out why. Figure out if we've cast them wrong, if we're not helping them get the most out of what they're good at, or something else is going on. Because people, like the rare exception, people really want to be good. They want to be a valuable member of the team. They want to be helpful. And I think that we just got to find the way for them. So go, make space, find space, and help create these spaces where a broader range of people can be awesome in tech, because we need them. We need to be representative of the world, and we need to be building awesome things. And we can do that so much better together if we give ourselves a chance. Thank you very much.